90% of the colored folks felt that. We were colored then. And on May 15th of this year, I got to address the graduating class, 150 Southern University graduates, and gave me my Jewish doctorate. And everybody's been wondering why I was so dumb all of those years. Now I'm not dumb, I got an honorary doctorate. That article. Look for it in the Sun paper, May 13th of this year. And I want to leave this part and thought to the young folks and the old folks and everybody else. There's one paragraph in that article where it says, if you see evil, discrimination against women, discrimination against Jews, discrimination against people of color, discrimination against anybody, it's an evil. Confront it, fight it, realizing that today you probably lose, but tomorrow you may win and the world will be a better place for your efforts.
Remember to come and ask your questions, you won't get an opportunity like this. Yeah, Mr. Mitchell.
And going back to the question, and also as an aside, Judge Johnson, a way to make sure Baltimore City, the next class of firefighters should look more like the majority residents of the city of Baltimore. What a difference. And Madam State's Attorney Clarence Mitchell taught us that anyone who stood up, that a man was to respect. And anytime, my fellow brothers, that anybody, a mayor, would be governor, or anyone, disrespects a woman of color power, you let them know that we stand strong. I said Clarence was a grandfather, but I just want to see the Sun reporter start writing all that down. But Clarence Mitchell was the great-grandson. And I knew it. I played with the reporters, you know. They spelled my name right this time. But Clarence Mitchell Jr. was the grandson of Enoch Pratt. Check the record Sun papers, as I have, and you'll see on Enoch Pratt paid the money to buy the house where Mary Pratt was born. And that's where George Albert Matthias Mitchell, Clarence Mitchell's grandfather, married the daughter of Enoch Pratt. Clarence Mitchell taught us to be accurate. And so I wrote the facts. And this is Clarence Mitchell who was there. And here's what he said. It was not until June the 19th, 1963, after the assassination of Medgar Evers by Byron D. LeBeckwith, where they were so repulsed the nation that President Kennedy introduced his second civil rights bill. And that in that bill, he wanted to, the title that he had for public accommodations would have been based on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. The lawyers know that that wouldn't have covered, it would have covered maybe McDonald's and Wendy's and Howard Johnson's, but it would have never covered Miller Brothers, Hooper's Restaurant, and all these restaurants, and the Heck Company restaurants that were intrastate. And as Clarence Mitchell says, that the troubling reality to me was that rather than President Kennedy throwing the full weight of the federal government behind civil rights forces whose cause it verbally espoused. Remember, Kennedy was saying, I'm with you, call Dr. King. But the Kennedy administration made a political decision to steer a middle course. All the Kennedy legislation was stuck in committee. And talking about your good friend, Senator Eastland, and Clarence Mitchell quotes him as saying, the Baron of, this is what Clarence Mitchell calls Senator Eastland, the Baron of the backwoods, Sunflower County, Mississippi. That's the
dealt with.
He read to a Mississippi audience one day about how he had broken the law on civil rights for 3 years, did not hold that meeting for 3 years when he was chairman, but to prevent anyone else from using the rules behind his back to do so, he had special pockets sewn into his pants, and for 3 years he carried all of the Kennedy civil rights legislation in his pant pockets to keep it from being heard. This was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. Senate. Clarence Mitchell, at the time Eastland was about to be made the chairman, made the comment that those who would simply go with seniority and allow a man who said that to become chairman of the Judiciary Committee was like unleashing a mad dog on the street of justice. It was through Jacob Javits, Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania, a Republican, Everett Dirksen, also the Nolan of California, and Richard Nixon, believe it or not, who when serving in the U.S. Senate of California, voted for the initial efforts and as vice president pushed to make sure that Eisenhower signed the 1957 Civil Rights Act. Remember the history that, and this is the way it evolves, but it was a coalition of churches and the NAACP. And as Clarence Mitchell said, God moved these men. Don't let anybody tell you God made it happen. That it was the power through people who he never thought he'd get votes from to make a difference. And the key vote, and I brought one thing for you, it's a little long, two things really. And while I'm doing that, please applaud John Ferran. I heard his name. Stand up, John. He's one of our little heroes of the Community Relations Commission. Through battle, he's got a little gray on lately. But he's still ready to fight. But I brought with me the pen that was used in the actual signing of the Civil Rights Bill. And for those who doubt me, I brought the picture of Clarence Mitchell being presented the pen by President Johnson, which is here, because it was Clarence Mitchell's belief that for the first time, this bill, because he was exasperated with the Kennedy administration for not having the guts to challenge these Southerners. You got to remember that we were right in the middle of Kennedy attempting to meet with Khrushchev. And therefore, Kennedy felt he needed the support of 7 senators more than protecting the constitutional rights of its citizens. And even after the assassination of Medgar Evers, the Kennedy administration submitted a weak bill. And I wrote one other article where Clarence Mitchell, the Afro-American newspaper, Attorney Pettit, as you said was our voice, challenged Bobby Kennedy to a debate that he didn't really believe in civil rights because he voted a black to a position of importance in the Justice Department, nor had he hired, from the time for the 2.5 years he was there at that point, hired a single black attorney in the United States Justice Department. Let's start setting the record straight. Let's not get caught up in these popular notions and get caught up in the efforts by the press and others to try to paint someone who isn't what they really are in our mind's eye. We knew Eastland was a skunk then, as Clarence Mitchell said, a mad dog, and the fact that he couldn't acknowledge his own child. White men been doing this a long time ago, yo. My grandmother used to say, I was protesting for freedom. She said, boy, you gotta remember, that's why you got all that curly hair. You were integrated a long time ago. In that spirit, know that you can make a difference though. And remember, that's what I want to get to the young people. That Clarence Mitchell doing all these things, it was persistent, patient. And the final thing, with all due respect to Dr. King and as Dwight Pettit, his father and my father were close because they believed in the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms.
Let's take a question from our audience.
Yeah.
I actually had 2 questions to pose to the panel. I'm a 16-year-old junior at Baltimore City College High School, and I know that a topic that people don't really like to touch on much is African American studies in our textbooks. I know that when we study government and when we study the past, there's a small section on African American studies, and there's a small section on what Africans, how they contributed to the freedoms that we had today, and I just wanted to know what you thought about that. And my other comment that I had was, how do you feel about alcohol stores, liquor stores, and chicken box stores on every corner in predominantly black neighborhoods that are owned by Koreans, and there aren't any black-owned stores that are predominantly black neighborhoods? I just want to know what you thought about that.
Out of the mouth of babes. Just get a quick answer, then we're going to move right on.
I'm going to deal with your first question regarding the whole curriculum piece that you talked about. Unfortunately, we don't see ourselves in the curriculum because those who are responsible for curriculum have been miseducated themselves. They do not understand, many of them don't understand, don't believe that we have had the significance in the history of this country that we've had. We have attempted to teach. When I say we, I'm talking about a significant group of black teachers across this state and the school districts have attempted to teach from an Afrocentric perspective. However, there have been those who said that what you are teaching is false information because they don't understand it, they don't know about it, they call it false. Now, what to do about it? Well, I talked firsthand about engagement. We have got to stand up and talk about these matters, or else our children are going to continue to experience what this young lady is experiencing, an absence of the African American in the history that our children are studying in schools. You've heard Judge Johnson. You've heard Michael Mitchell. Judge Johnson wrote a book. When that book is finished, I'm going to see to it that it gets into every school in this state. You can understand why we need this. And what I'm challenging each one of you in this room, boy, girl, old, young, whoever you are, I'm challenging you to stand up wherever you are. I don't care if you don't have kids in public school. That is an excuse that you can no longer use, folks. I don't have any children in school. Yes, you do. You may not have birthed that child. You may know the relation. But you are black like that child is. Yes, sir. So you'll be treated as that child is, or he is you. So it is your responsibility to stand up and speak to the authorities about the curriculum your children are being taught in schools. It is a Eurocentric monocultural curriculum that says nothing about who you are. We got our kids coming out of 12 years of public education exposure with no esteem about their importance in this world or in this country.
We're going to take a stab at the young lady's second part of the question.
Yeah, I just, go right ahead, Judge.
Could I take just one stab at that one? The corner grocery stores are basically owned by the Koreans. What I say to us colored folks is for us to own our own stores. They would never, ever let us go into their community and own the store, but yet we do it and we don't have our own stores. I say don't knock them, copy them. I spent 13 months on the demilitarized zone in Korea at the 1st Cavalry Judge Advocate General Officer, JAG, you probably heard of, and then 2 years on Okinawa. 3 years I spent in Southeast Asia as a JAG captain without coming home, fighting a war in several different countries, which I can't talk about, including Vietnam, for justice and liberty. And when I got back to Mississippi, my mama, my grandmama, sent me uptown to tell the people that, the old age assistant people, that I was not supporting her. She'd gone up to get her $10 a month. When you got to be 65 in Mississippi, everybody got $10 per month if you needed. The colored folks got 10, the white folks got 15. So my grandmama had gone up there to see her, and she bragged about she had a grandson who was a captain in the army. So when I walked in the place and I walked through the door, it said white only and a little place color only. And after being shot a few times in Vietnam and plane crashes, helicopter and all that, just escaped with my life just like that, I wasn't about to go through no back door. So I went through the front door and the lady said, "Nigga, can you read?" So I just simply turned around and got in my dad's pickup truck and went on back home and told Grandma what had happened. And she said, "Boy, I'm sure proud of you." So I didn't have a job then, but I was hired a few months later after J. Edgar Hoover hit me at 217 pages of FBI sheet, and here I was, Chief of the Military Justice Division for the Pacific Command of the United States Army in Okinawa. And in the Justice Department, you needed a small clearance, but he's downgraded me, so he didn't want me in there because of the sit-in. Read about that on the 13th of May in the paper. And so at any rate, don't criticize others for working hard, pulling up your pants, combing your hair, using the King's English. That's the only one available. Stop calling our women these bad names. Stop calling each other these N-word names. And one more second.
One more second.
I tried the case as a young lawyer for the Justice Department in Birmingham, Alabama. A week after I was assigned in justice, not hired by Bobby Kennedy, but Ramsey Clark. They put me in charge of Birmingham for the Justice Department. I tried the cases that resulted in the faculty integration, faculty and staff throughout the Deep South. When I walked in the court that day, the judge told me, said, "I don't know what crazy people sent you down here, but I will never order a white teacher to teach a Negro child." Now, the Negro was a perversion of nigger, and they thought you were stupid enough not to know the difference. Thank you.
Okay, this is,
Could I address the young lady's last thing? I think that's one of the issues of the 1964 Civil Rights Movement or the Civil Rights Act that needs to be examined. When public accommodations were open, that did not mean that the ice was colder. What that meant was that law that sanctioned our denial for those opportunities to go into restaurants or hotels or frequent places where we were denied, that was dissolved as a matter of law, and we had the opportunity to in fact go to these places and exercise our rights as citizens under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The difficulty seems to be that in that transition, where at that time we did not go, we had businesses in our community. We had businesses and restaurants and hotels. We had, whether they were liquor establishments or chicken stores, but we owned them. The problem is now that we don't own them, but part of the problem as relates to owning them is because we have not been able to, in fact, maintain the capital and recirculate the capital, because we as a people have decided that through the 1964 Civil Rights Act of opportunity that the other person's ice is colder. So we have to examine ourselves when we go outside of our community, when other people put the dollar in their communities 2 and 3 and 4 times, and we take our dollars and they go outside of our community. I mean, if we look at Baltimore City, when the NAACP was here for the National Convention a couple of years ago, I don't think we had maybe one black restaurant to service them. We had no black hotels. We had no major black entertainment establishments. We had nothing in the whole city of Baltimore that could in fact accept and take that money from a black convention and redistribute that money back to the black community. So that is to say, not only as the young lady indicated, the ownership, but we have to re-examine ourselves as a people in terms of where we spend our monies.
I've heard Derek Bell and others mention that perhaps the focus should not have been so much on integration, but maybe more on equal resources or maybe a performance-based type of thing for education. Any thoughts on that as a new engagement?
Okay, question on equal resources right here.
Okay, we know that as Mr. Gentleman from the Board of Education talked about engagement, we know that the time was right for the passing of the Civil Rights Bill, and we'd like to know about the Big Five and the role that they played in engaging America in getting ready for the passing of the Civil Rights Bill. Next question, there was no mention of anyone involved in the Civil Rights Movement other than Juanita Mitchell. And I know that there were a number of women.
September Clark.
Well, today when I was at work, something that black people should never vote for Republicans. And I was wondering, why do people say that if they help pass the Civil Rights Bill? And I had another question. For the past 6 years, I've been going on my mother's vote. And as far as the presidential election, the popular vote doesn't even flip President Big. So I was wondering, why should we vote on the presidential stand other than the fact that people like you fought so hard for us to be able to vote? That's my two questions.
Okay, issue of voting. Go ahead.
I just wanted to know if you think, will the Civil Rights Act ever be enforced?
Will the Civil Rights Act ever be enforced? Good question. Be the last one. We'll direct these towards the panel.
I just wanted to know how many civil rights cases occur.
A lot, but we'll.
You start with A. Philip Randolph, who was the founder of the first black trade union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And he took on the Pullman Car Company and with it. And E.D. Nixon, who helped Dr. King in Montgomery, was a member of A. Philip Randolph's union. Whitney Young, who was head of the Urban League. Then also James Farmer, the Congress of Racial Equality, White Williams from the NAACP, and we've been talking about it, but Dorothy Height, who, of course, is still alive, everybody, and is going strong, and was the woman president. But you got to also know that behind Medgar Evers, there was a Marilee Evers. Behind Dr. King was Coretta King. And behind each of these men and women in their own right, we were taught early on, you got to remember, I came from a home where women were never considered unequal. Women were equal, if not more equal than men.
What about September Clark?
And of course, someone wanted to know about whether or not will the Civil Rights Bill ever be enforced. Well, the fact that you're sitting here in the library at this Kellogg Auditorium means it's being enforced. Federal money that comes to this library, getting that means they can't segregate against you.
It's under Title VI.
And also, but also, that I'm glad you mentioned that, but also, if you go down to Maryland General Hospital, they have to treat you because of the and federal monies come in. They have to make sure that you get care. Also, you go to a downtown department store, you can try on clothing at the head company now. When I was growing up, I couldn't try on a pair of pants at the head company. Also, you could go now and sit down. Do you know that at the corner of North and Pennsylvania Avenue, there was a Wilson's Crab restaurant? And we could only get the carry out. And let you know that at North and Linden, there was Nate's and Leon's, and had the largest chicken salad and shrimp salad sandwiches. And so all people eating, we could, the Civil Rights Bill came to Judge Johnson, let me just read the titles. I'm glad you mentioned that, Professor, because it is important to know that the Community Relations Commission itself is here and is functioning because of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Title I of the Civil Rights Act had to do with protection of voting rights for African Americans. Title II had to deal with public accommodations. Title III had to deal with public facilities, meaning hospitals, colleges, libraries, and things of that nature. Beaches. Did you know in Mississippi, the public beach there in Galveston Bay, blacks couldn't go on the beach even though the money was supplied by the federal government? Well, that law took care of that. And of course, under the voting statistics in the Civil Rights Commission was given additional powers. Also, there were certain court procedures to keep the states from frustrating the efforts of the Justice Department to enforce civil rights legislation. And under Title 10, the Community Relations Service empowered the creation of the Baltimore Community Relations Commission.
Okay.
And then 11 is the jury trial amendment, giving the right of blacks to elect to have a jury trial, or in some instances not, because if you got a jury in Mississippi, you know what their verdict was going to be. So if it was a matter of law, the courts could enforce it.
Let's do it. We're in final jeopardy right now, so let me ask one more question. What the young brother asked about voting Republican, we're in an election year right now. We know that every 4 years since, as Judge Johnson pointed out, a certain period that blacks have voted Democratic. Comments on that?
Well, my take is, I'm a Democrat. I'm a yellow dog Democrat. That means in the olden days I voted yellow dog rather than for a Republican, but not so anymore. I'll vote for the person who's going to be in my interest, and that's the way I think everybody should vote. But let me just address one thing real quickly. The young lady talked about women in the civil rights movement, but not for the women, not standing behind the men, but standing beside them.
And in some cases in front, like
In front of them. Wouldn't have been no civil rights movement. And let me just say this. You see all the women in the police department? That was my lawsuit. You remember when Chief Pomelo said that all women were little balls of fluff and so endowed by that creator? That was my lawsuit that got all women in the police department, and I was a charter member of the National Organization for Women, so we know my feeling about women.
I want, there's so much here. I mean, this program could have probably been 3 hours long, but I wanted all of us to give another hand to the panel. And thank you very much.
We've got to be firm in the notion that Clarence Mitchell, in this fight for civil rights, we believe in the brotherhood of mankind. Black and white together were the lines that we shall overcome. And as emerging minorities come into this country, we can't believe the hype. We can't simply dismiss people and take attitudes about Korean Americans who are establishing businesses, because the same thing whites said about us. So let's be clear that we have the tools within ourselves and that we cannot use the same things that were used against us, because there were members of, if it hadn't been for May Gilman, the daughter of Johns Hopkins, the first president, John Hart Gilman, the first president of Hopkins, helped Clarence Mitchell get a scholarship to Lincoln University. And she helped bring citizens from Baltimore to testify in the anti-lynching law. But for the inclusion of blacks and whites in this whole effort, and those in the Jewish community who banded together to make society worthwhile, we would have been up the creek. So remember the brotherhood of mankind.
Okay, thank you very much.